Welcome to the Assembling Inclusion podcast. On this show, we feature different programs, individuals, and initiatives focused on being more inclusive of individual needs. We invite you to learn right alongside us. If you want some additional resources or access to our courses, please visit our website or follow us on social media. But for right now, let's get right to the episode.
Welcome to the Assembly Inclusion podcast. I'm here today with a slightly different format than typical for our show. Next week is the ISTE conference, and if you haven't heard of ISTE, it stands for International Society for Technology and Education, and every year they have a huge conference. It's one of the world's most comprehensive EdTech events. If we go off of last year's conference statistics, there were over 16,000 participants who went in person, over 82 countries in attendance, over 1,500 sessions, and over 1,000 expo hall booths. Just for some perspective as to how big this conference is in the world of education. And this year, the conference is actually being held in Denver, Colorado. So ISTE is hands down my favorite conference of the year. And I will actually not be attending in person this year. I'll only be presenting and attending virtually from my home. But regardless, I wanted to do a little celebration in honor of the conference. And you might be wondering what this has to do with our usual topic of disability inclusion. Well, there are special education, assistive technology, adaptive technology, inclusion, and UDL session strands within the conference program. And I wanted to take a moment to highlight some of these sessions and the presenters that will be facilitating them. We are going to be talking to 4 presenters who are presenting on a variety of topics, all with supporting all learners at their center. These sessions are not only about special education and inclusion. There are other sessions that also follow these topics, and if you're using the program search on the ISTE app or on the conference website, you can filter out and find other sessions that also address these areas. But as you're creating your session schedule, which I know is honestly the hardest part of attending because there are just so many amazing sessions, I wanted to spotlight a few that might be of interest to you all. I'm also doing a session at ISTE on artificial intelligence and the Universal Design for Learning framework. I'll be presenting virtually on Sunday morning at 8 a.m. Mountain Time, 10 a.m. Eastern. We're going to be going over how to use generative AI tools like Google Gemini, ChatGPT, and Microsoft Copilot to help plan units and lessons to support all learners. Now, the 4 presenters we're featuring in today's episode are helping to lead the charge to make education more accessible for all students. So let's jump right in to hear from each of those presenters. First up, we are talking to Katie Fielding.
Hi, I'm Katie Fielding, and I am just new to the book creator team, but I'm a longtime educator of 20 years. I was just my district STEM coach. And so I'm really excited to be going to ISTE this year and sharing a lot of accessibility content. I'll be doing an Ignite session on accessibility, as well as working in the accessibility playground. So I'm really excited for those 2 sessions, as well as a session I'm doing on Universal Design for Learning and book creators.
Awesome. So you're going to have a lot of different, inclusion-focused sessions, which I'm really excited about. Can you tell us a little bit about each of those sessions and kind of what you're hoping that participants will get out of them?
So the Ignite session, if you've never been to an Ignite, it is 20 slides, 15 seconds, very fast paced. So I'm really just hoping to get people to be aware of the need for accessibility in their classroom, for the need of the awareness of the variability of students and the needs that they might have in their classroom, and 3 quick takeaways of something they can do. In my a little bit longer session at the playground, the accessibility playground, which is on Tuesday of ISTE, I'll be kind of doing a similar presentation, but much longer, not 15 seconds a slide, going definitely more in depth into some of those concepts that I'll be talking about at the Ignite. And then in my session on UDL and Book Creator, I'll be showing just how great Book Creator is to support UDL implementation in your classroom.
And now I'm really upset that I'm not going to be on site because I would love to check out each of those sessions. The Ignites are so much fun, very high pressure, but so important that you're going to be getting that information out there to so many people all at once.
Yeah, I'm really excited about it. I am definitely practicing for that timing piece.
That timing is critical, but I like that you're doing the longer session too, so you can really get more in depth with what people need to know about accessibility.
Yeah, and I'm excited for the accessibility playground in general. Jason Trin is running that, and definitely something to check out. Going to be lots of good speakers there in that space.
Yeah. That's always a good time. The accessibility playground is always, I always walk away with something new. It's a good space to be in. So getting more on a personal level, I guess, what was your inspiration behind wanting to propose and develop these sessions for ISTE this year?
Yeah, I've been doing disability advocacy basically my whole life. So I was born with cystic fibrosis, which is a lung disease, a genetic disease. And I've been so fortunate to have been able to make a career. Many people with CF, don't live as long as I have or don't have as much capability of having a career because you're balancing so much with your medical care. And fortunately, our community's had like a great miracle in the past 5 years of this medicine called TRICAP, changed the game for a lot of us. And so now, like all that time that I was really investing in advocating for my personal, disabled community, I've now transferred to advocating for all disabled students in classrooms to try and make those spaces just more accessible for everyone.
I love the connection between your personal life experience and the work you're doing and then bringing it back into students as well. I just think the takeaways you're going to be sharing are so important, and every teacher really, an educator in general, really needs to have an understanding of how to support everybody in their classroom.
Yeah, I really hope so. From tech leaders and making sure they're picking the right tools that are accessible for all students to the classroom teacher and just understanding all the features that might benefit some students. Everyone definitely has a role to play in the accessibility game. And so just amplifying the message of making sure accessibility is something that every educator is thinking about is really important to me.
Definitely. I hope that everybody takes that away from the session too, because I always have the same thing. People always said, well, I'm not a special education teacher. And it's well, you're educating students, are you not?
So everyone has a role to play in this. Everyone, for sure. I agree.
I know you mentioned that you're having a couple key takeaways from the Ignite and you're going to expand in your longer session, but what's something that you really hope the participants will walk away fully understanding once your session is finished?
I hope they walk away with empathy if they didn't have it before. That's ultimately the key to making change, is to make sure that people feel empathy for I like to think, it's maybe not great to say, but I think our students as users, right? We are designing experiences that they're using to learn. And so when I want to think about it, I want our teachers to be empathetic to their students, their users, for the learning experiences they're designing, and make sure they're designing with everyone in mind. That's really what I hope that their takeaway is that they're designing, because that's what teachers are. We're designers. We're making experiences. And just like any product designer or any artist, you want the biggest audience to buy your work, right? And so if we're thinking of our students, their engagement is their purchase of our work, the more accessible we make it, the more students are going to be engaged. And then the more success we are supporting in all of those students. So that's really what I think about, and I hope they take away. Yeah.
And I hope so as well, because I think that makes a lot of sense to think of them as users within that experience. You want to make sure that all of your users are considered when you're designing. I mean, in the same way that a company would when you're designing a product. Yeah. Same way for a classroom. You don't want it to just fit a target number of students. You want to open it up to everybody.
So I think teachers can learn a lot from UX designers, your user experience designers, and thinking about all the ways that someone can experience that lesson that they are creating.
In addition to your sessions, because I know we talked about this before a little bit, but since I'm not going to be at ISTE live in person, I still like to talk about it anyway. What are you most looking forward to with attending this year?
Oh, well, my biggest personality trait, or if you do those kind of tests, is learner. I'm always just looking to learn more from my peers. And so those small conversations in the hallway where I'm getting to see people and catch up and just hearing about the latest and greatest things that are happening in their classrooms and their learning spaces, that's what I'm looking forward to the most.
That's always the best time. The conversations in the hallway are just, I feel like those are always the best experiences.
Yes. The sessions are great too, but then I think the follow-up questions and follow-up conversations can be really a great way to carry the conference outside the conference. Because that's the point, right? We're not just supposed to go there and keep everything there. We're supposed to take it back with us. And I think for me as a learner, I process through teaching. And so in a conversation with someone else and learning and having that dialogue back and forth, that's embedding that learning for me personally to make it something I take action on when I get home.
I connect with that so much. That is exactly how I feel when I learn something new. That's how I best understand it, is by either further discussing it with somebody else and then bringing it back into my own practice. That's perfect. And as a whole, as my last question for you, just as a wrap up, if our listeners want to learn more about you and your work that you're doing, how can they get in touch with you and learn more?
Yeah, I am at Katie, Katief, on X. And you can find me by searching my name on LinkedIn. And those are probably good ways to get in touch with me.
Perfect. And remind me, if our listeners are attending ISTE Live in person, do you remember what days and times your sessions are?
The playground is on Tuesday evening, and my Ignite and my book creator session are both on Wednesday morning. And if you just want to stop by, you also find me at the book creator session or the book creator booth. And I'll also be working the ISTE certification room because I'm an ISTE certified trainer. And so I'll be supporting that room all day Tuesday as well. So if you're in there, you'll see me.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Katie, for just sharing a little bit about your session with us. And I'm excited to hear how it goes.
Thanks so much for having me. It's been great.
Next up, we are going to be talking to Susan Aplin. Susan is the District Instructional Specialist at Lexington Richland 5, and will be presenting a session called UDL in Action in the K-12 classroom at ISTE this year. So can you tell us a little bit about the session that you're going to be presenting at ISTE this year?
It's really going to be a brief overview of the UDL guidelines. So if someone's new, they'll kind of get a glimpse at it. And if they're familiar, it'll be a refresher, hopefully. And then I'm including examples of UDL from classrooms across my district so that people can see and talk about what it really looks like when you're using it in the classroom. And my presentation is going to be delivered via Lumio by Smart, so it's intended to be interactive and very engaging.
I appreciate that you're going to do just the brief overview first of UDL, because even as somebody who uses it so frequently, it's always nice to get that refresher. And those examples, I'm sure, are going to be fantastic, because I can't get enough of any time somebody shows me a real life example or something. It's a perfect way to get people to start bringing it into their classroom.
Yeah, because that's one of the questions I have a lot of times when I work with UDL people. They're like, well, what does it look like? Like, I get the concepts, but what does this mean in practice? So I'm excited to bring that to more people.
Do you have a specific inspiration that led you to propose and develop this session?
I really just love universal design for learning. And in my district, I've kind of become the unofficial UDL expert. It's not in my title anywhere, but I've developed and taught graduate classes, and I do a lot of PD, and I coach teachers, and I do observations, and it's just become a lens through which I think instruction and what goes on in a classroom, you can really make a difference. And I just love it. So the more times I can talk about it, the happier I am.
I love that. I'm a big fan of UDL as well. I don't get to bring it into my role as often as I would like, but I appreciate anytime somebody has as much enthusiasm for it as I do. So I'm really grateful that you're sharing about it. Do you have a specific target audience in mind, like thinking about who might be attending the session or who the session might be good for? I know you mentioned before, that it could be anybody of varying levels of understanding of UDL, but are there specific targeted roles in mind?
I feel like it seems a little bit like cheating to say anyone, but part of what I hope to do is personalize the session a little bit depending on who's in the audience. And that's one of the reasons I use the interactive pieces, because I kind of want to know who's there so I can cater that. I think an actual classroom teacher could kind of get some examples, but I also think a coach could see, hey, if I'm trying to help someone else, this is what this looks like. And then I also feel like administrators, if they're there, helping them kind of bridge that gap between maybe professional development they're doing for their schools on this and then what they want to see when they walk in classrooms and seeing it live in class. If you're a super, super big expert, this might be a little more, beginning for you, but maybe some of the examples would still be something you hadn't seen. So I welcome anyone who wants to come.
No, and I think that's great to be able to say it's open to anybody. There are some sessions that are so targeted for specific roles, but I like any time that it's got that broad overarching reach, which UTL so often does, because it really does touch every single role in, an education system. So from the teachers to the coaches, to the administrators, to the coordinators, to the directors, every role in some way can be impacted by UDL. So I think that's great that you have that broad outreach for your session.
It's not focused on any particular tool or platform, then that means it's open to, like if you work in a Microsoft district or you're a Google or you're whatever, it doesn't really matter because we're talking kind of about what this looks like. The tool you use is what you bring on to make it happen, but we're going to look at how we make it happen.
That's really important because I think that's one of my sticking points sometimes with technology sessions. And I've fallen into that trap sometimes where it becomes overly reliant on I'm a Google school and this is what it looks like in a Google district. But I like that it's the concept, not the tool. I think that's going to be really impactful for everybody. And speaking of impact, what do you hope that your attendees will take away when they leave your session?
I really would hope that they could walk away with at least one practical idea that they could decide to potentially implement. And I'd love for them to have a better understanding of UDL. I will talk integrated, obviously, in Course Intuit is a little bit about ed tech tools. So maybe thinking about how the tools that they have could support this approach. It might not be the ones that I happen to talk about, but I think that practical idea paired with how is the technology that's available to me in my school or my district going to help me support this new, or might not be new for everyone. It might just be recommitting to it or revisiting it. But how could my technology help with that?
Even if they are already thinking about UDL, it's always great to have that, kind of refresher in your mind of what, you're right. I've gotten away from this and I need to bring my practice back to UDL centered. So leading into that, are there any specific overall outcomes or impacts that you hope that your session will have on a larger scale?
I really think one of the struggles that some people have, I think, with UDL or when you're first getting into it is that it seems so big. There's so many pieces to it and there's so many resources and there's so much out there. And so what I hope is that maybe the people that come and the discussions that get sparked from it is that it really is about it being a mindset. And the key things that I talk about a lot are addressing barriers and being more flexible. So if you could take that philosophy and just when you're looking and you're designing your instruction or you're coaching a teacher into designing a lesson, just having those small things that I think make such a big impact. How are you addressing barriers? How are we meeting the needs of all the students that are in the room? And how are we maybe being a little more flexible in what we're doing?
That's a nice way to sum it up too, because I do think that I love UDL. But when you're presenting, multiple means of action and expression, multiple means of representation, people get really overwhelmed by the process. So I like that you broke it into barrier and flexibility. It's an easy entryway into it, but it's still beneficial for students at the same time. So in addition to your sessions, what are you most looking forward to this year?
This will be my second in-person ISTE. And coincidentally, the last one I attended was in Denver in 2016. So to me, that's what ISTE represents. It's in Denver. But really, the people, again, sort of as cheesy as that sound, making the connections, people that I know locally who will be going, it'll be great to kind of see them in a different environment and make connections. But I have learned so much from people online, mainly through Twitter or X, that, that's my main connection, that I've met so many people virtually. And I love being able to then get to see them in person and learn from them. And then I really think I also appreciate getting to see the vendors and get updates on some of the tools that we use in my district to be able to have some training. I like how so many of them in the booths, they bring in educators to do training, and as well as the people who work from the companies, that you get that nice mix of the how-to, but the application piece. So I think those are the two things I'm really looking forward to.
The vendor space in ISTE is so amazing. And I appreciate that connection between the employee of the company, then bringing in the teacher who's actually using it. It's a great way to kind of have a better understanding. How can listeners learn more about you and the work that you're doing?
Like I said, I'm pretty active on, I still call it Twitter. My handle is at Aplin EDU, APLIN EDU. And that's really the main way to connect with me. Like if I write a blog post for a company or I do something, like that's where I put it all out there. So that's really the best way.
And I'll make sure to link your profile in the show notes for our listeners. I still call it Twitter too. Can you remind us the date and the time for your session for our listeners who are attending in person?
My session is Monday morning, first thing, 8:30 in the morning. And I think that's a good spot. I hope everyone will get up and get at it. And I hope to see them then.
Love a good morning session. Yeah. Morning sessions are always great. I'm so energized in the morning, so
exactly.
It'll be a great one.
Ready to go.
Well, thank you so much, Susan, for sharing a little bit about your session. And we're excited to see how it goes at ISTE.
Thank you so much for having me. And I appreciate you pulling these different sessions together under this umbrella of assistive technology.
Next up, we are going to be featuring Doris Nhan.
My name is Doris Nhan, and I am the K-12 Academic Technology Specialist at McLean School. The name of my session is Leveraging Technology and Choice to Reach Students with Learning Differences.
Can you tell us a little bit about the session that you're going to be presenting at ISTE this year?
My session is really focusing on how educators can use technology mindfully and choice to reach students who have learning differences or learning challenges, as we like to say. Those include things like students with ADHD, students on the spectrum, students who have executive functioning disorders, dyslexia, dyscalculia, students who have anxiety. So anybody who learns differently often benefits from a different approach to using technology and introducing choice in the classroom. So that's really the crux of the presentation, is how do we incorporate all those things into the classroom in a way that's meaningful for those kids, but also reaches other kids as well.
So there's a wide range of different, people who could benefit from learning about your session then. Was there a specific inspiration that led you to want to propose and develop this session for the conference?
So McLean School serves this particular population. Our bread and butter is really students who have challenges in the classroom, often mild to moderate. So the students who could use a little bit of extra help or maybe get lost in the fray because they don't need as much help as other kids, but they still need more help than maybe your neurotypical students. Those are the kids that our school serves. And so this is sort of an area where I've worked my entire career at McLean. It's sort of a niche in the sense that the way we teach and the way that our best practices are, they've evolved to accommodate these kinds of kids. And a lot of conversations that I've had with educators who are in different classrooms that are different populations than ours often struggle with how to differentiate themselves in ways that are meaningful. My inspiration really came from finding ways to make it easy for teachers to reach students, to save them time, but also make them more effective as educators.
I love that because that's where my heart is. I taught that population of students for the most part. I mean, year to year it varied, but for the most part, it was my students who tended to fall through the cracks. And they didn't realize until later on that they needed more support. And then I was trying to support them in an inclusion classroom. So I love the inspiration and I'm excited for, the different strategies that you're going to be sharing. Is there a specific audience that you have in mind? Is there a specific, grade level or role in a school district that you think would be important? Or is it kind of like everybody can benefit from this session?
I think the way that I targeted the session was really for classroom teachers, particularly for general education teachers. The idea is that you can take some of these strategies and some of these ideas and implement them into your classroom tomorrow. I guess my intention was for classroom teachers to benefit, although I think anybody could probably benefit from it. I taught sixth grade for a long time, taught fifth grade too. So my expertise is in the middle grades, though I've taught K through 12 at this point. So I think a lot of them can be extrapolated for any grade level, although, like I said, my expertise is in the middle grades. But I do think that some of these strategies can easily be adapted to any grade.
I was a middle grade teacher too. So that makes me so happy.
Special population, those kiddos.
They were the best. Sixth grade, love it so much.
Yeah.
I really think the middle grade examples are always nice. And I do the same exact thing where I always tend to stay in that zone because that's where I spent the most time in my career. But you can scale up or scale back to the lower elementary too. So it's kind of a nice spot because you really can adjust strategies to fit any grade level at that point.
Yeah. In my role, I'm the K-12 academic technologist. So our school is K-12. So if anybody has questions about how they could differentiate it or scaffold it for the little ones versus the older students, I'm happy to discuss it too.
I know you have a lot of different strategies you're probably going to be sharing. Is there a specific key takeaway or a couple key takeaways that you're hoping that the audience will take away from attending your session?
My session is a poster session, so I won't be doing a full presentation like from beginning to end. The intention is that I'm hoping that people will come with questions or have a specific goal in mind to answer. My presentation focuses on how to implement choice and then also tips and strategies to implement technology. So my biggest takeaways then, as I'm hoping people will get, is just ways to make technology accessible for students with learning challenges, and then also how to effectively create that flexibility in order to have choice and let students kind of make those choices, which can be kind of scary. It's a different way of thinking if you're really used to that direct instruction. And so I hope that just teachers will leave with just one or two strategies of how they can make it more student-centered than perhaps what their classroom is right now.
I think the poster session really lends itself well for taking away those key strategies. I spend the most time at ISTE at the posters usually because it's just so easy to be able to grab what you need and to take away things that you could apply right, like you said, right to your classroom right away. So I think that's going to be a really nice format for this type of session. I'm excited that more teachers are going to be learning about choice too, because I feel like that is scary for a lot of people. So Hopefully they come away with some positive feelings toward it.
Yes.
So in addition to your session, what are you most excited about for ISTE this year?
I'm excited to connect with other educators and other people in my similar role. I feel like teaching is such a bubble sometimes. You're spending 8 hours with kids and then maybe a few hours here and there with your colleagues. Even then, you're sort of in this little bubble of like your grade level or the people that are next to you. And so I find going to conferences like ISTE is like taking a breath of fresh air and realizing that you're not in it alone, and to find that kind of camaraderie and the sense of community amongst educators. So I'm excited to get that energy back and get started for the new year.
That is always a nice feeling, the connection with people. And I think that is the biggest piece. I mean, especially if you're like, there's one of me in my district, like as a tech coordinator. So it's nice to be able to connect to people in similar positions who are experiencing similar issues or have worked through similar issues. That's definitely the best part about attending. And there's so many people to be able to connect with too, which is great.
Right. Yeah.
So how can listeners learn more about you and the work that you're doing? Do you have like any social feeds or anything, or just how can they learn more about your work?
I do not have social media related to my work, mostly just for time. It's one of those things where you have to choose, as an educator, you have to choose what to create boundaries with. And so I fully admire and use teachers who are on social media, but that's just not something that I have. But teachers are more than welcome to shoot me an email, set up time to talk if they want to follow up more with my experiences and my work at McLean School. I think my email address is is on my presentation, but I think it's on like the ISTE directory too. People are more than welcome to email me and reach out if they ever need to connect. And I'm happy to have conversations that way.
I think you're right. There is in the app, I feel like there's a directory of everybody who's attending. So that's a great way to connect.
Come to my session and then you can have conversations.
Even better. See, there's nothing better than that face-to-face connection. And as somebody whose professional Instagram is non-existent, there's like 3 posts. So I totally understand. Like there's just no time to get Twitter. I was a little bit better, but this year has like fully fallen to the wayside. So I understand.
And I'm the kind of person that like it needs to be either really good or nothing, like, so I can't invest that time. It's just not in the wheel for me.
It's like a full-time job by itself.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I fully admire those educators that can do it. Sure.
Me too. So for our listeners who are like, yes, I want to connect and talk about this in person, can you remind us what day your poster session is and what is the block of time for your poster?
My poster session is scheduled for Sunday, June 23rd from 2 to 3:30 p.m. And apparently I am at table 26. Don't quote me on that, but that's where I should be.
And I will put that in the show notes for our listeners in case you want a reminder. And thank you so much for sharing with us about your session. And I'm really excited to, I won't be there in person to hear it and see it, but it sounds like it's going to be a really impactful conversation for everybody who stops by to see the poster.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
And for our final guest today, we are going to be talking about Devon Caldwell's session.
My name is Devon Caldwell, and the title of my session at ISTE is Tech Tools Sprint for Inclusive Classrooms. And I'm presenting that on Monday, June 24th at 2:30 p.m. My current role in education is I'm a kindergarten teacher, but in the past, I've also worked as a resource teacher. So primarily early years and resource. I also teach sessionally at a couple of universities in the teacher education programs as well.
And can you tell us a little bit about the session that you're going to be presenting this year at ISTE?
Well, as the name would imply, Tech Tools Sprint, it's kind of a fast run through a number of useful tools and approaches that I've integrated in my practice as both a resource teacher and a classroom teacher, and then things that I like to share with pre-service teachers in teacher education programs. So it's a lot of information in a short amount of time, but my idea with the session is so that people know about it and they think, oh, that would work for me or would work with a student I support. As long as people have an awareness about it, then they have the information to dive a little deeper in.
I love the idea of a sprint. I am all about let's go through a lot of ideas in a quick amount of time, especially at a conference like ISTE. Was there any specific inspiration that led you? I know you said you were a resource teacher at one point in time, now you're a kindergarten teacher, but is there any inspiration that led you to say, hey, I want to do this at ISTE?
Over the years, I've learned a lot about how technology can support me in my role as a resource teacher, as a classroom teacher. I've seen the difference that it can make for all learners. And I just wanted to kind of take 20 years of what I've learned in practice and share it with other educators so that can hopefully impact other teachers and the students they support. So that was my inspiration in putting it together. And just kind of looking at my session content, it starts off with kind of the tools I've used for productivity as a resource teacher, because we know there's so much case management and meetings and all of those kinds of things. Then it goes into the tools that I use to support learners. And I'm coming from a universal design for learning lens, because I firmly believe that what's good for one student with exceptionalities really should be made available to everyone. Because if that tool is helpful for one, it's often helpful for everyone.
That's great advice. And I wish that's something that more people would kind of absorb into their practice. We've come a long way, but I think there's still a little bit of a disconnect where people think it's just doing something to support your students with exceptionalities in the classroom. But it's good for everybody. If you bring in a tool, anybody could use it. So, why not bring it in? And is there a specific audience that you have in mind for the session?
My specific audience would be kindergarten to grade 12 teachers, as well as resource teachers. And I think people who work in teacher education programs would also find it useful, because regardless of what you're teaching in a teacher education program, especially if it's a methods course, I always like to talk about, okay, and how can we support students with exceptionality? How will we make this accessible to everyone? Something that is like a lens that I use to frame this session, and I already referred to it before about how if it's good for one student, it's generally good for everyone. But even taking like the example of Microsoft Immersive Reader or Google Read and Write, and teachers will often think like, oh no, that's just for that one student who is struggling with literacy. But I always talk to teachers about, well, think about how you learn and how you consume information. Like you might listen to a podcast because you're walking. Maybe you choose an audiobook because you're driving. And we get to choose the formats that we consume information in. So I think we need to make those formats accessible to everyone. So that's kind of the lens that it's framing my presentation.
That's a great point. It's a great way to bring it to the teachers to help them understand, because you're right. I mean, we do, as people in general, go through different avenues to access our learning. We're not all learning the same way. So it's a great perspective to say, like, look, you do it for yourself. You could also do it for your students. I like that there's such a wide audience that could benefit from attending your session. Are there any specific, I know we talked about a couple different ideas, but are there any other key takeaways that you hope the audience will walk away with after attending your session?
I think the big one is just that universal design for learning lens. I think that's really an important message. And also, I think it's about trial and error. Like we know that there are a ton of tools out there. And it's deciding on which tools are the best fit for our classroom practice and the learners we support, and what tools might be most engaging and interesting for our learners. So, for example, I might not use a lot of podcasts in kindergarten, but perhaps with middle years or high school students, I might see that, like they love using their AirPods, they like to use their devices. So maybe if they're able to access content through a podcast or share their learning by creating a podcast, that might be a really good fit for this group. So I think just the broad awareness of the range of possibilities out there, and then teachers using their own critical thinking skills and knowledge of the students that they support to make decisions about what they might like to try. It can get really overwhelming, but I think if teachers leave my session with one or two ideas they might be interested in implementing next year in their classroom, I'll feel like that's a real win.
And that's what's kind of really nice about your session overall, is that you're going to be sharing so many different things, allowing teachers to pick and choose what works for them, because there's nothing I get more frustrated with than having to sit through a session that I'm like, they showed two things and I knew those two things already. So even though, there's a lot of options that might be overwhelming, I think it's great that you're going to be showing a wide variety, and then teachers can kind of say, oh, I didn't think about this. I'm going to take this and bring it into my practice. So it's nice that you're going to be sharing so much information with them.
Well, I think what's really great about ISTE is lots of the tools I'm talking about are exhibitors at ISTE. So if something captures your interest, you can go find the DIFIT booth or the Lumio booth and ask someone more knowledgeable than me about all the ins and outs of it, and really get a plan for how you might implement it in your practice.
That's a great point. That expo hall is amazing. And it's so great to be able to hear about something in a session and be like, let me quickly go get a demo so I can try it out with my teachers or my students. Mm-hmm. So that's a great point. And, speaking of great things about attending ISTE, what are you most looking forward to aside from presenting and sharing during your session?
Oh, well, I'm excited about the expo hall. That is always a big highlight. This year, I get to present at the Lumio booth. So I'm really looking forward to that. And I just think that's going to give me such an opportunity to connect with so many teachers from all over the world. It's all about the connections for me. I love meeting people at conferences. I love finding new collaborative partners for projects. And you're never going to find me at home on a conference night because I fully take in all the social events. They are so much fun. So I'm really excited for EdTech Karaoke because that was such a highlight last year.
Yes. That's one of the things I'm so bummed about missing this year. That is a staple of the conference, and I will be living vicariously through everybody who's attending live, because that is a big highlight. It's a great opportunity to connect with so many people from all over the world, really. It's a great opportunity for that. So how can listeners learn more about you and the work that you're doing? Do you have any socials that you share out of, or a website? Basically, how could they follow the work that you're doing?
A good place to start is find me on Instagram. My best friend and I have a little education consulting business. And we are KG, that's for Kenton Girls, because we're from Kenton, kgeducation.ca. That's on Instagram. That's also our website. So we spend lots of time on Instagram, so that's a great place to connect with us. You can also find me on Twitter or X as India0309. So I'm active on social media, and I'd love to connect with teachers in those spaces.
Awesome. And I will link your profiles that you mentioned in the show notes for anybody who is listening and wants to, hop on and follow and see all the great work you're doing. And just remind us one more time, when is your session?
So it is Monday, June 24th from 2:30 to 3:30. And the location is room 403/4.
Perfect. And that's a solid time. Everybody's coming back from lunch. They're ready to keep on going. And that's a great time of day. It's such an energizing conference that I feel like no matter what time you are, somebody's excited to be there. But thank you so much for sharing with us a little bit about your session. And I am excited to hear how it goes.
Oh, well, thanks so much. It was exciting to talk about it. It's got me excited about it.
I hope that this session helped to showcase some of the session options for everyone who is attending ISTE next week. Remember, you can find additional sessions on special education, diversity and inclusion, adaptive and assistive technologies, and the Universal Design for Learning framework by using the filters in the ISTE program search. If you are attending the conference, I hope you have an amazing time and learn so much. I'll be living vicariously through each of you through social media. Be sure to check out our show notes for all the session information from our wonderful guests in today's episode. I'll also be presenting my session on artificial intelligence and UDL on Sunday morning virtually, and I've included that information in there as well. If you are not attending or this is the first time you've ever heard of ISTE, I hope you got some insight into some educational topics surrounding inclusion and supporting all learners. We will be back in 2 weeks with another episode, and we'll be back to our regular one guest format, so I will see you all then.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Assembling Inclusion podcast. I hope the information in this episode taught you something new, gave you a new idea, or showcased a new perspective. If you liked the episode, feel free to leave us a review or comment. If you have a recommendation for an individual or an organization who would make a great guest, you can message us or send us an email at assemblinginclusion@gmail.com. See you next time.